2.5 miles beneath the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean, a ship lies in the darkness. It has been there for over 110 years. Over 1,500 people died when it sank. The world called it the greatest maritime disaster in history. They called it a tragedy, an accident, a case of human arrogance against the forces of nature. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if the ship at the bottom of the ocean isn't even the Titanic? To understand this conspiracy, you need to go back to where it all began. Not the night of the iceberg, not April 1912. You need to go back to 1909, to a shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, to a company called Harland and Wolff. Here, the White Star Line, one of the most powerful shipping companies in the world, is building 2 ships, sister ships, nearly identical in every way, the most luxurious, most powerful ocean liners ever constructed. Ship number 400, the RMS Olympic. Ship number 401, the RMS Titanic. They are so similar that workers who built both ships sometimes struggle to tell them apart. Same length, same width, same grand staircases, same dining rooms, same first-class suites. Standing next to each other in the dry dock, they are almost a mirror image. Almost. The Olympic launches first in June 1911. The pride of the White Star Line, the largest moving object ever built by human hands. Newspapers call it a masterpiece. The world is transfixed. But the triumph doesn't last long. On the 20th of September 1911, just 3 months into service, the Olympic is sailing out of Southampton when something goes catastrophically wrong. A British Royal Navy warship, HMS Hawke, collides directly into the Olympic's starboard side. The impact is devastating. A massive hole is torn into the hull. 2 of the Olympic's watertight compartments are flooded. Her propeller shaft is twisted and bent. The Olympic limps back to Belfast for repairs. And this, right here, is where our story truly begins. The White Star Line files an insurance claim for the collision damage. And here is where they receive the first devastating blow. The claim is denied. The court rules that the Olympic was at fault for the collision, not HMS Hawke. The White Star Line receives almost nothing. The repair bill is enormous. The ship is out of service for weeks, losing revenue every single day she sits in dry dock. The company is bleeding money. And here is the detail the conspiracy theorists point to. The detail that started everything. The company was facing financial ruin. And according to Gardner, that is when someone, somewhere in the upper levels of the White Star Line, had an idea so audacious, so criminal, so breathtaking in its scale, that it is almost impossible to believe any sane person would have suggested it. What if they switched the ships? Here is the theory, laid out exactly as the conspiracists presented. The plan was this: take the damaged, financially ruined Olympic, the ship that was costing them a fortune, and secretly convert it to look exactly like its brand new sister ship, the Titanic. Meanwhile, convert the Titanic to look like the Olympic. Then, send the disguised Olympic out on what the world would believe was the Titanic's glorious maiden voyage. Arrange for the ship to be struck by something. Abandon it in a controlled evacuation. Collect the insurance money on the lost Titanic. And sail on with the real Titanic, now pretending to be the Olympic, making profitable voyages for decades to come. It was, on paper, the perfect crime, and the theorists say there is evidence. Compelling, specific, and deeply unsettling evidence. Exhibit A, J.P. Morgan. The White Star Line was owned by the International Mercantile Marine Group, controlled by American financial titan J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in the world, a man whose wealth and influence was almost without limit. J.P. Morgan had personally booked a first-class suite on the Titanic's maiden voyage, one of the most coveted tickets in the world. And then, at the very last moment, he canceled. His official reason, illness, business matters. He needed to stay in Europe. But here is what makes conspiracy theorists raise their eyebrows. Photographs taken just days after the Titanic sank show J.P. Morgan, perfectly healthy, relaxing at a spa in France. Not ill, not detained by urgent business, perfectly, suspiciously fine. And Morgan was not alone. At the last minute, an extraordinary number of the wealthiest, most well-connected passengers canceled their bookings. 5,500 pounds worth of roses that had been ordered for the first-class dining rooms were inexplicably canceled before departure. And the ship's own chief engineer, a man who knew every inch of its machinery, had an intense, whispered conversation with a colleague on the dock before departure. His colleague later said he seemed troubled. Exhibit B, the lifeboats. The Titanic carried just 20 lifeboats. In a ship designed to carry over 3,300 people, there were enough lifeboat spaces for only 1,178. This was not illegal at the time. Maritime law hadn't kept pace with the size of ships. But here is what the theorists ask. If you are sending a brand new, supposedly unsinkable flagship on its maiden voyage, why would you not fill every single lifeboat davit? There was space for 64 lifeboats on the Titanic's deck. They installed 20. The conspiracy theory claims this was intentional. The plan was not for the ship to sink with everyone on board. It was meant to be a controlled evacuation. A nearby ship, the SS Californian, which was sitting stationary in the water just miles away, was supposedly positioned there to rescue the passengers after the ship was deliberately abandoned. The insurance would be collected. Everyone would survive. The perfect crime. But then, the iceberg happened, and the controlled evacuation became a catastrophe. Exhibit C, the windows. Here is where it gets deeply technical and deeply interesting. When the Olympic was originally built, its B deck had a row of open promenade space, no windows along a particular section of the hull. When the Titanic was built, this section was enclosed, adding an extra row of windows, additional private promenade space for first-class passengers. This meant the two ships had a visually distinct, photographically documented difference along their hull, a difference any trained eye could spot. But conspiracy theorists point to photographs taken in early 1912, after the Olympic returned to Belfast for its refit, and claim that these photographs show the Olympic's hull being modified. The open promenade section being enclosed, windows being added. The Olympic, they say, was being made to look like the Titanic. White Star Line's official explanation: this was a routine modification carried out because first-class passengers on the Olympic had complained about wind and spray in the open promenade space. A comfort upgrade. Nothing more. The theorists say, or, it was the moment the switch began, and then comes the night of April 14th, 1912. The theorists' version of events is this. The ship that struck the iceberg was not the brand new Titanic on her maiden voyage. It was the old damaged Olympic, disguised as the Titanic, deliberately placed in iceberg-heavy waters, with a rescue ship waiting nearby to pick up the passengers after a controlled evacuation. But the plan went wrong. The iceberg damage was far more catastrophic than anticipated. The nearby rescue ship, the Californian, failed to respond in time, its crew confused by distress rockets they couldn't interpret. And instead of a clean, survivable insurance job, 1,517 people died in the freezing Atlantic. If the theory is true, those 1,517 people did not die in an accident. They died in a crime. But now, we need to do something that every good investigator must do. We need to look at the evidence against the theory, because it is substantial. Counterpoint 1, the insurance. The Titanic was worth $7.5 million, but was only insured for $5 million. Starter story. If the White Star Line deliberately sank it for the insurance money, they still lost $2.5 million. As maritime historian J. Kent Layton writes, the Switch conspiracy founders, quite literally, on its financial merits alone. Counterpoint 2, the hull numbers. Every single piece of decorative wooden paneling inside both ships was stamped on its back with the ship's yard number. Olympic, 400. Titanic, 401. When artifacts were recovered from the wreck on the ocean floor, they bear the number 401, the Titanic's number. Furthermore, the hull number 401 has been spotted on the Titanic wreck's port propeller. So where does that leave us? The mainstream verdict is clear. Historians, maritime experts, engineers, the overwhelming consensus is that the ship at the bottom of the Atlantic is the Titanic. The evidence from the wreck itself, the hull numbers, the artifacts, the structural details, all point to one conclusion. It is exactly what the world was told it was. And yet, the questions that the conspiracy theory raises are real questions. J.P. Morgan's last-minute cancellation has never been satisfactorily explained. The Californians' failure to respond to distress signals has never been fully accounted for. The decision to sail with less than a third of the lifeboat capacity on the maiden voyage of the most expensive ship ever built remains troubling. Maybe these are coincidences. History is full of coincidences. Or maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the locked archives of the White Star Line, in the private letters of J.P. Morgan, in the whispered confessions of men who died a century ago, there is a truth that was never meant to surface. The ship is 2.5 miles down. The men who built it, sailed it, and owned it are long dead. The documents that could prove or disprove everything are lost, burned, or buried. All that remains is the wreck. And the question, subscribe, because next week we go even deeper, and the rabbit hole only gets darker from here.